The road to Black Hollow Farm wound through miles of thick forest, the trees pressing close on either side like silent witnesses. The air was heavy with fog, so dense that the world seemed reduced to shades of gray and white. Joaquim had been driving for nearly 3 hours since leaving the small town of Halewick, guided only by the old directions in his grandfather's letter. The engine hummed low, swallowed by the stillness of the woods. It felt as though the past was reaching out, closing in on him with every turn. He hadn't set foot on this land since he was a child. His memories of it were fragmented: sunlight on the fields, the creak of the windmill, the low hum of voices from the workers' quarters. He remembered the stories whispered by his grandmother, about shadows that walked when the moon was high, about voices in the well. She'd always crossed herself when she spoke of them. Back then, Joaquim thought they were only old superstitions, a way to keep children from wandering too far. Now, as the fog thickened and the gravel crunched beneath his tires, those memories stirred uneasily in his chest. When the farm finally appeared, it did so without warning, a wide stretch of barren land, hemmed in by decaying wooden fences and fields that had long since surrendered to weeds. The farmhouse loomed at the end of a narrow dirt path, its white paint peeled to reveal gray wood beneath. One of the shutters swung in the wind, knocking rhythmically against the window frame. Joaquim parked and stepped out of the car. The air was colder here, with a faint metallic tang that reminded him of rust or blood. He stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the place settle over him. The silence was oppressive. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Inside, the house smelled of age and neglect. Dust coated the furniture like a second skin, and cobwebs hung in the corners like torn lace. The grandfather clock in the hallway was still ticking, impossibly, though it must not have been wound in decades. Its pendulum swayed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, marking time that no longer seemed to belong to the living. He found the letter again in his coat pocket, its paper soft from being handled too often. His grandfather's handwriting slanted and shaky. "This house carries our name and our debt. Whatever sleeps beneath it must not be woken. If you return, you must listen. The earth remembers what men forget." Joaquim had read those words dozens of times, trying to decipher their meaning. His grandfather had died alone in this house, found sitting in the parlor chair, with his eyes open and a candle burned to the base beside him. The locals said the old man had lost his mind, but Joaquim's father never spoke of it. The subject of the farm had always been forbidden. Now the inheritance was his, along with the burden that came with it. As night fell, the fog rolled closer to the house, wrapping it in a shifting white veil. Joaquim lit a fire in the hearth and opened a bottle of whiskey he'd brought along. The flames flickered across the faded wallpaper, revealing old stains that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The wind outside moaned through the cracks, making the house sound like it was breathing. At first, the noises were easy to dismiss: the settling of old wood, the scurry of a mouse. But around midnight, the rhythm changed. The footsteps in the hallway were soft, but unmistakable, moving from the kitchen to the stairs. Joaquim froze, his glass halfway to his lips. The sound stopped. He stood and waited. A long moment passed, and then came another sound, the faint clinking of metal, like chains brushing against the floorboards. It was followed by a whisper, low and broken, the syllables indistinct but heavy with sorrow. "Who's there?" he called out. The whisper stopped. He grabbed the flashlight from his bag and moved toward the hall. The beam cut through the dark, revealing dust motes swirling in the air. The front door was closed. The staircase loomed to his left, its steps warped and dark with age. He aimed the light upward. Nothing. Then came a slow, deliberate knock from somewhere beneath him. The cellar. He hesitated. Every instant told him not to go, but curiosity, that dangerous inheritance of his family, pushed him forward. The cellar door was narrow, hidden behind a curtain in the kitchen. When he pulled it open, a stale gust of air rushed out, thick with damp earth and something else, something older. He descended carefully, one creaking step at a time. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The cellar was larger than he remembered, its stone walls slick with moisture. Wooden barrels lined one side, their lids cracked open. The floor was covered in fine dust, except for a series of footprints, bare, small, leading toward the far corner.
There, beneath a beam of moonlight from a narrow window, stood an iron ring set into the ground. The metal was rusted, but the ring was attached to a chain that disappeared into a crack between the stones. Joaquim crouched beside it. The air around the ring seemed colder, heavier. His breath came out in clouds. He reached out, hesitated, then touched the iron. It burned. He jerked his hand back, heart racing. The skin on his fingertips throbbed, though no mark showed. And then, faint, almost imagined, he heard a voice behind him. "Leave it where it lies." He turned sharply, the flashlight sweeping across the room. No one was there, but the air carried a presence, a density that made his skin crawl. He backed toward the stairs, but before he reached them, the chain rattled violently. The ring in the floor trembled, as though something below had pulled on it. Dust rained from the ceiling. Joaquim fled up the stairs, slamming the door behind him. His breath came in gasps. He pressed his back against the wood, listening. Silence returned, but it was not a natural silence. It was watchful. He poured another drink, hands shaking, and sat by the dying fire. The flames crackled weakly, shadows sliding along the walls. He told himself it was only nerves, only imagination. But deep down, he knew the truth. Something in this house was alive, and it had been waiting for him. Sleep came only in fragments. Every time Joaquim drifted off, a sound would jolt him awake, the soft creak of a floorboard, a whisper too close to his ear, the faint clatter of chains from somewhere deep beneath the floor. The fire had burned down to embers, but the air in the room remained heavy, thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth. Outside, the fog had swallowed everything. The windows were pale and opaque, as if frost had bloomed across the glass from within. When morning came, it brought no warmth. A thin light filtered through the curtains, casting the house in shades of ash and silver. Joaquim walked through the rooms, trying to shake the unease from his body. Every corner seemed to hold a shadow that lingered just too long. He stopped at the parlor. A portrait hung above the mantel, his great-great-grandfather, the original owner of Black Hollow Farm. The man's stern face was rendered in dark oils, his eyes sharp and cold even after centuries. Joaquim had never noticed before, but now there was something unsettling in the way the paint had aged. The corners of the mouth seemed to twist, almost imperceptibly, into something cruel. Joaquim studied it for a moment before turning away. He needed air. The farmyard was silent, save for the wind rustling through the brittle grass. The barn stood in ruin, roof caved in, doors hanging loose. Beyond them the field stretched to the edge of the woods, where a low mist clung to the ground. He remembered running there as a boy, chasing dragonflies, never knowing what had happened on this land before him. Near the old barn, he found the remnants of a stone foundation, half buried in weeds. The stones were scorched, blackened. His grandfather had told him it used to be the workers' quarters, though that was the polite word they used in the family. The truth was simpler and uglier. This was where the enslaved had lived. He knelt, brushing the moss from one of the stones. Beneath it, faint carvings marked the surface, letters perhaps, or symbols too eroded to read. His fingertips traced them gently, and for a moment a pulse of warmth spread through the stone, like something living beneath it. He snatched his hand away. The wind shifted then, carrying with it a low, mournful sound. It was not quite a voice, and not quite the wind, something between the two. It rose and fell, distant yet near, until it seemed to move through him. That night, he dreamed of fire. He stood in the middle of the fields, the sky glowing red. Figures moved through the flames, men, women, children, silhouettes made of smoke and light. Their eyes were hollow, their faces calm in the way only the dead can be. One figure stepped forward, reaching toward him. Her hands were bound in iron, the chains glowing faintly like embers. When she spoke, her voice was soft and echoing, as though carried through time. He said the earth would forget, but it remembers. It always remembers. He woke to the sound of the grandfather clock striking 3. The air was colder now, his breath visible in the dark. Something moved at the edge of the room, a shadow that didn't belong to the furniture. He sat up slowly, every nerve taut. The figure was there, standing by the doorway. A woman. Her dress was torn and colorless, her face obscured by the dark. The faint shimmer of iron circled her wrists. Joaquim's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, but the words died before they reached his tongue. She turned her head slightly, and though he could not see her eyes, he felt their weight on him, ancient, sorrowful, patient. Then she lifted one trembling hand and pointed toward the floor. The cellar. A shudder ran through him. He blinked, and she was gone. Morning again, but the light brought no relief. He moved through the house in silence, every creak of the floorboards echoing in his bones. He avoided the cellar door, though his gaze kept returning to it, drawn like a tide. By afternoon, he could no longer resist. He brought a lantern this time instead of the flashlight, as though its warm glow might offer protection. The cellar greeted him with the same damp chill, the air thick with the smell of soil and rust. The chain was still there, motionless now, but something about it felt changed. The dust around it had been disturbed, as though someone had walked circles around the ring during the night. Joaquim crouched again, holding the lantern closer. The light caught on something etched into the stone beside the chain. A word, carved deeply, the letters jagged and uneven. Remember. His pulse quickened. He traced the carving with his fingertips. From the darkness behind him came a whisper. You bear his name. He turned, the lantern trembling in his hand. The cellar was empty, but the air carried a faint shimmer, a distortion, like heat above fire. Through it, the outline of figures began to take shape, faint, wavering, transparent. Dozens of them standing in silence. Men and women in tattered clothing, children with eyes too old for their faces, their gazes fixed on him. Joaquim could not move. The lantern's flame wavered, stretching shadows across the stone walls. The air grew heavier until breathing felt like drowning. one of the figures stepped forward, the same woman from his dream. She lifted her hand again, pointing toward him. Blood remembers blood. The flame flickered violently, then went out. Darkness swallowed him whole. He stumbled backward, his hand finding the stairs. He climbed blindly until he burst into the kitchen. The cellar door slammed behind him with a force that shook the walls. He leaned against the counter, gasping. The silence returned, but now it felt crowded, filled with the weight of unseen eyes. He poured a glass of water with trembling hands and caught his reflection in the window. For a heartbeat, it wasn't his face staring back. The man in the reflection wore old-fashioned clothes, his eyes cold and sharp, the same eyes as the portrait in the parlor. Joaquim staggered back, the glass shattering on the floor. The reflection was gone, but his own heartbeat thundered in his ears. He sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to leave, to drive away and never look back, but something deeper held him there. A sense of obligation, of unfinished reckoning. The chain, the carvings, the whispers. His grandfather's warning echoed in his mind. Whatever sleeps beneath it must not be woken. But it was too late for that. The earth had already begun to stir. By the third night, Joaquim had stopped pretending he was alone. The house had its own rhythm now, soft thuds that came from behind walls, whispers that moved through rooms like drafts of cold air. Even when the house was still, he could feel it breathing around him, the wood and stone alive with something ancient and restless. He spent the day trying to distract himself, exploring the land under the weak autumn sun. But no matter where he went, the feeling followed him. The air itself seemed thick with memory. The ground was uneven, the soil dark and rich in a way that made him uneasy. Every gust of wind carried faint echoes, laughter, crying, a distant hum of song that vanished when he tried to listen closer.
Near the edge of the woods, he found an old well, half covered by tangled vines. The stones around its rim were slick with moss, and the rope that once held the bucket had long rotted away. He peered down into the darkness, expecting only his reflection, but saw nothing. No bottom, no glimmer of water, only an endless black that seemed to pull at his gaze. As he leaned closer, a faint whisper rose from below. "Joaquim." His breath caught. The voice was soft but unmistakable, like the sound of someone speaking through a long tunnel. He stepped back sharply, his heart racing. The whisper came again, this time clearer. "You carry his blood." He stumbled away, the grass brushing against his legs as if trying to hold him there. He didn't stop until he reached the farmhouse, chest heaving, palms damp. Inside, he shut every door, every window, as if wood and glass could keep out the past. By nightfall, the fog had returned, thicker than before. It pressed against the windows, muting the world outside. Joaquim sat by the fire again, the warmth doing little to ease the chill that had settled in his bones. He took out his grandfather's letter once more, reading it under the dim light. "The debt is older than you can imagine. It was not paid in life, and it cannot be buried in death. If you hear them, listen, but do not answer." He lowered the letter, staring into the flames. Do not answer. But what if they were calling because they needed to be heard? The clock struck midnight. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the house, the sound of splitting wood. Joaquim jumped to his feet, the letter falling from his hands. It came again, louder, from the parlor. He moved cautiously down the hall, each step creaking beneath his weight. The portrait above the mantel was gone. In its place, the wall was cracked open from corner to corner, the wallpaper peeled back like skin. Through the gap, he saw something glinting faintly in the firelight. A piece of metal buried in the plaster. He reached out, prying it free. It was a rusted key, small and cold to the touch, its bow shaped like a ring. Behind him, the grandfather clock stopped ticking. A silence so complete followed that it made his ears ring. Then came the voice again, low and distant, echoing from beneath the floorboards. Below. Joaquim's hand tightened around the key. He knew what it meant. The cellar. He didn't want to go. Every nerve in his body screamed to leave, to drive until the fog was only a memory. But he couldn't. Not yet. Something had been waiting for him here long before he was born. Something that wanted to be remembered. He lit the lantern and descended once more into the dark. The air down there felt different this time. It was colder, yes, but also heavier, charged with an invisible weight that pressed against his chest. The chain in the center of the floor was coiled tightly now, as though drawn up by some unseen hand. And beside it, where before there had only been stone, now stood a small wooden chest, its surface blackened with age. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a sound like a sigh. Inside, wrapped in brittle cloth, lay a collection of old letters, a tarnished silver cross, and a leather-bound journal. The pages of the journal were yellowed, the ink faded but legible. He opened it. June 14th, 1783. They begged for mercy today. The old one pleaded for his daughter, said she was innocent. I told him the land would not yield unless it was fed. The earth takes what it is owed. The others will not understand, but they will see when the harvest comes. Joaquim's stomach turned. He turned the page. June 17th. The fire would not stop. Even the soil glowed red. I heard them screaming beneath the ground. I told them it was done. I told them they would rest, but the wind still carries their voices. They will not let me sleep. The entries ended abruptly, the ink smeared as if by a trembling hand. Joaquim closed the book, his mind spinning. The old one, the daughter, the fire. This was the truth his family had buried. Their prosperity built on cruelty, sealed by blood and flame.
The chain rattled. He looked up. The air shimmered again, and the shapes began to form. The same ghostly figures from before, standing around him. But now they were clearer, almost solid. Their eyes glowed faintly, not with anger, but with something deeper, expectation. The woman stepped forward. Her wrists still bore the marks of the iron, but her face was calm. "You have seen," she said softly. Joaquim's throat was dry. "What do you want from me?" "To remember," she said. "To listen." He hesitated. I didn't do what they did. I'm not him." The air trembled at his words. "The blood is not the sin. The silence is," she said. The lantern flickered, its flame bending as if drawn toward her. "He bound us to the earth. You can unbind us." "How?" he whispered. The woman raised her hand, pointing to the journal. "Read it aloud. Let the earth hear the truth." The walls seemed to pulse with her words. Joaquim felt the weight of the centuries pressing down, the guilt of generations settling on his shoulders. His hands shook as he opened the journal again, but he began to read.
The words came out cracked and halting at first, then stronger, echoing through the cellar like a chant. The air vibrated. The chain began to glow faintly, the metal turning red as if heated from within. The figures closed their eyes, and for a moment the room filled with the faint sound of singing. Soft, mournful, beautiful. When he reached the last line, the light flared bright enough to blind him. He shielded his eyes, stumbling backward. And then, silence. When his vision cleared, the cellar was empty. The chain lay broken on the ground, its ring split in two. The journal was gone. But the air felt lighter. He climbed the stairs slowly, his hands trembling, unsure if what had happened was real. The fog outside was lifting for the first time since his arrival, revealing the pale light of dawn spreading across the fields. For the first time, the house felt still, peaceful. Or so he thought, because as he turned toward the parlor, he saw the portrait on the wall once more, restored, whole. But the face of his ancestor had changed. It was smiling. For a long time, Joaquim couldn't move. The smile in the portrait held him frozen, not wide, not exaggerated, but subtle and knowing, as though the man inside the frame were aware of something he was not. The eyes, once painted with cold indifference, now glimmered faintly in the morning light. He took a step closer. The floor groaned under his weight, and the air around the portrait seemed to hum. He reached out, his fingertips inches away from the cracked varnish. And then, the faint scent of smoke filled the room. It came from the fireplace, though no fire burned there. The smell deepened, not wood smoke, but the acrid stench of burned flesh and earth. He staggered back, hand over his mouth. The clock in the hallway began to tick again, this time faster, its rhythm sharp and uneven. Each second echoed like a heartbeat. He turned toward the sound, and the entire house seemed to shift. The walls stretching, the ceiling creaking, as if something vast and unseen moved within its bones. The light dimmed. The morning outside faded into a bruised twilight. Fog curling back toward the windows like claws. The whisper came again. You broke the chain, but not the curse. Joaquim spun around. The woman stood at the edge of the room once more, her form more solid now, her eyes deep wells of light. Behind her the others appeared, filling the corners, the hallways, the stairs, silent witnesses, hundreds of them, bound together by the same sorrow. I did what you asked, he said. I read the truth. I freed you. You freed the land, not him.
He followed her gaze to the portrait. The smile had grown wider. The painted eyes now gleamed like wet glass, alive with something malevolent. The faint crack running down the canvas pulsed, spreading slowly like a vein. He fed us to the earth, the woman whispered. And when the earth took us, it took him too. His soul is buried in the soil, beneath the roots, beneath the house. The curse is not our bondage, but his hunger. The floorboards trembled. From beneath them came a deep, rhythmic thudding, not like footsteps, but like a heartbeat echoing through wood and stone. Dust fell from the ceiling. The grandfather clock's hands spun wildly before stopping at midnight once more. Joaquim stumbled backward. "What do I do?" "You must finish what he began," she said, "but not in his name, in ours." The walls groaned. A jagged crack snaked its way up from the base of the hearth, splitting the plaster with a sound like tearing fabric. From within the fissure came a faint red glow, pulsing in time with the heartbeat below. Joaquim could feel it vibrating in his chest. The air smelled of iron and rain, of earth turned by unseen hands. The woman raised her bound wrists, and the faint light of the chains glimmered again. "Blood opened the gate," she said. "Blood must close it." He froze. "No, I won't." But before he could finish, the floor beneath the portrait burst open. A gusted air, hot and foul, rushed upward, extinguishing every trace of light in the room. Joaquim shielded his face as a sound, deep, guttural, and ancient, rose from the earth. The portrait fell, crashing to the floor, the painted man's face twisted mid-fall, his eyes rolling white. Then came the voice. It was not human. "You think you can rewrite what was promised? This land remembers. It is mine." The woman stepped forward, her ghostly form flickering like a candle flame. "No longer." The air cracked open between them, and for a moment Joaquim saw what lay beneath, a vast chasm of black soil, where roots twisted like veins and faces moved within the dirt, writhing in silence. The soul of his ancestor was there, half-formed, half-consumed, its eyes burning with endless greed. It felt it reaching for him, not with hands, but with memory. The voices of the dead rose around him, chanting in a language older than words. The sound was deafening and yet beautiful, a dirge of release and reckoning. The woman turned to him. "The earth will not take you, Joaquim. You were meant to return it." He didn't understand at first, until he saw the cut on his palm, reopened from when he had touched the burning chain days before. The blood glimmered faintly in the dim light. He looked at her, terrified.
"One drop," she whispered, "for remembrance." He hesitated only a moment. Then he pressed his hand to the cracked floor. The effect was immediate. The heartbeat stopped. The air went still, the fog outside freezing in place. The red glow in the fissure brightened, spreading through the cracks in the wood like molten veins. The portrait ignited, burning from within until the man's face dissolved into ash. The roar that followed was not of rage, but release. Centuries of bound souls exhaling at once. The entire house shook, the walls groaning as light burst from the foundation. Joaquim was thrown backward, blinded, weightless for a heartbeat. Then, silence. When he opened his eyes, the house was gone. He stood in the middle of an open field under a pale morning sky. The fog had lifted completely, revealing the valley beyond, wide, green, and impossibly still. The air smelled of rain and earth, but no trace of smoke, no ruin, no house. Only the faint outline of old stones half buried in grass. At his feet lay the broken chain, rusted and dull. And beside it, pressed into the soil, was the silver cross from the chest. He picked it up, the metal cool and clean now, as if newly forged. A voice carried on the wind, soft, almost kind. "It is done." He turned, but there was no one there, only the breeze moving through the tall grass. He stood for a long time, unsure whether to weep or smile. The burden that had haunted his family for centuries was gone, but so was everything they had built upon it.
The land was free, and so were those who had suffered upon it. As he walked back toward the road, the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. The air shimmered faintly, and for a moment he saw them, the figures of the freed souls standing among the fields, faces turned toward the rising sun. They did not speak, they only watched him pass, fading with the light. When he reached his car, he looked back one last time.
Where the farmhouse once stood, a single tree had begun to grow, tall and silver in the morning light, its roots deep in the soil that had once been bound by chains. He placed the cross beneath it. "Rest now," he whispered. As he turned the key in the ignition, the radio flickered on, static at first, then a soft, distant voice singing an old hymn, one he didn't recognize but somehow knew. He drove away without looking back. Behind him, the mist gathered once more, not in menace, but in peace, curling gently over the land like a shroud drawn across a sleeping face. And deep beneath the soil of Black Hollow Valley, the heartbeat that had echoed for centuries finally stilled.